guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Path of Exile 2 Skill. Today we're going to be taking a look at another one of the marks. We already looked at Freezing Mark, and this is Sniper's Mark. Sniper's Mark is another mark that you have to use. You have to actually cast it on the target. It does have some pretty interesting stuff. Let's just read the skill real quick, and we'll go over the nitty-gritty and the specifics. So first off, it does cost 71 mana, which isn't too bad. It has a cooldown time of 6 seconds, which is unfortunate because that means you can only get like one effect every 6 seconds. But we'll talk about how you can maybe get more. It has a use time of 0.5 seconds, which is actually a little slow on the slow slide, but yeah, if you have some attack speed and stuff like that, I can't remember if this counts as a spell or an attack, but it doesn't really matter. Any kind of increased whatever will affect that use time and bring it down a little bit. We have limit one marked target, so you can only mark one target at a time. That'd be cool if you could actually mark more than one. That would actually be neat, but you can't mark more than one. The maximum mark duration is 8 seconds, so you can only have 8 seconds of time to essentially deal with, whatever it is that you're doing. Area and duration, maximum mark duration, 8 seconds. Next critical hit against the marked enemy is increased by 77%. That's a pretty huge amount of critical damage bonus. And then you also get, as an additional effect, you get next critical hit against marked enemy has 15% increased critical damage bonus. So you get a total of, what is that, almost 100%? It's not quite, but 77 plus 15. You get a little bit extra. You can get like 4% extra from like quality bonus. So you can see I have 4% extra right now. So you can easily get up that up to almost like 100% increased critical damage bonus, which is a pretty nice amount of critical damage bonus. It really is. And then on top of that, the extra bonus from the Gemling Legionnaire that you see down there at the bottom, marked enemy deals blank percent less damage. It goes up to 10% and can scale a little bit higher than that depending on quality. So you can actually make it so that the monster hits you for less damage as well as you dealing more damage to them. Now, not only does Sniper's Mark also give you more critical damage bonus, but it marks the target, and the next critical hit that the target receives activates the mark, consuming it to deal extra damage and granting you a frenzy charge. Now, the main reason most people come to Sniper's Mark is for the frenzy charge. It's a way that you can generate frenzy charges on a target, and it's actually a pretty good one. Let's talk about how you can get the most out of this particular ability, especially with like support gems and stuff. And let me just go ahead and buy some because I know I'm running low. I'm constantly burning tier 5 uncut supports. I need more. I need more. Let's just get like 10 of them.
Let's see if there are any takers.
All right. So when you're looking at a skill like this, and I didn't even check my shop. I got anything on here? Let's see, change. Oh, he gave me back some change. He gave me some change, boys. Get some change. So when you're looking at a skill like Sniper's Mark, there's not really a lot that you can do with it. The first thing is to do with the frenzy charge. So the frenzy charge, obviously, is going to be something that a lot of people are going to be coming to the skill for, and you can use Charge Profusion. Charge Profusion makes it so that supported skills have a 30% chance to grant an additional charge, and you also get the 15% chance to generate a random additional charge, which is going to be either Endurance, Frenzy, or Power Charge. You can actually get another Frenzy charge. So there is a small percent chance that you'll get the 30% chance to get an additional charge and the 15% chance to get an additional random charge, which will also be a Frenzy charge. So you could technically, when you're using the Charge Profusion, end up with 1, 2, 3 Frenzy charges in a single attack, which is interesting. I highly recommend using this if you're using Sniper's Mark specifically for frenzy charges, because it's going to make a huge difference. And then we have Charged Mark. Charged Mark is actually really good. I highly recommend that you take a look at this one. This one has supported mark skills causing them to trigger a Charged Mark when they are activated. Charged Mark creates a shocked ground at the target's location. Shock ground radius is 2.2 meters, and shock ground is 6-second duration. Shocked, specifically, if you look at what Shocked does... so we need to actually look at Shock. So Shock is an ailment that causes the targets to take 20% increased damage and lasts for 4 seconds on players or 8 seconds on non-players by default. This means that if you utilize the Charged Mark, then not only will you get the extra critical damage bonus for your crit, But you're also going to get an extra 20% damage from the shock ground as well. So it's actually a really good way to add additional damage to your Sniper's Mark, just so that you have an additional way of stacking damage on the enemy. It could also just simply be a way that you're getting your shocked ground if you want to have shocked ground all the time for, say, some specific spell that requires shocked ground. Like, I know Tornado, when it goes over shocked ground, will gain access to, you know, additional damage modifiers, or like Eye of Winter when it goes over shocked ground, and so forth and so on. There's a lot of different ways that you can potentially utilize shocked ground, and it's just a really nice one that you can add in. Efficiency is, of course, is going to reduce the cost of the mark, but it doesn't really need to have the cost reduced. I mean, if you absolutely have to. And then we have prolonged duration. I'm pretty sure prolonged duration does actually affect this. As you can see, it increases the maximum mark duration up to 10.8 seconds when you use prolonged duration. So it gives you a little bit longer time to have to be able to activate the effect. And let me grab one of these just so I can beef it up with the support gems that we're looking at. So Charged Profusion, really good. Charged Mark is really good. That's actually a really nice one as well. So we'll probably end up using Charged Mark. And then there's a couple other charged ones that for some reason aren't showing up here. Eternal Mark is really interesting. So supported mark skills causing them to not be consumed the first time they are activated, which essentially allows you to apply the mark and get 2 uses out of the mark instead of just 1. I highly recommend this one. This one's actually really good, and definitely something that you can get a lot of usefulness out of. There's also Marked for Death. Hits against marked enemy. Hits against targets marked by supported skills break armor, equal to 15% of physical damage dealt. So you can use the Sniper's Mark, or any of the marks really, to be able to break armor. But, of course, you have to actually have, like, physical damage, right? So it specifically states physical. So if you're running like elemental, like lightning, fire, ice, or chaos or something, or poison, there's a lot of things that you could potentially be running that wouldn't work with this, but a physical build, you can definitely get some good usefulness out of this with a physical build. Overabundance, of course, could potentially be a usefulness here, because it's going to allow you to get 1 more mark. So you could put 2 marks instead of 1. Mildly useful, I guess. It's kind of a overhead burden, though, could be having to cast multiple marks, and we'll talk about how you could potentially get away from casting the mark in a second. There's also second wind, so you can cast the mark twice, but you can't cast, well, even if you can cast the mark twice, you can't actually get 2 marks unless you have overabundance, because that increases the limit, which is limit 1. So this would increase the limit to 2, but then you would still not be able to cast it more than once every 6 seconds. So kind of meh. There's also this one here, Mark of Siphoning, which is enemies marked by supported skills cause you to leech mana equal to 8% of physical attack damage they take from you. This one's actually kind of nice. So whenever the targets are marked, you can basically leech off of them. Trying to think if there's anything else really on here that's super interesting. That's the lower version of Marked for Death. There's also a lower version of Prolonged Duration. There's a lower version of Mark of Siphoning. Most of these are like okay-ish. And there's also a lower version of Charged Profusion. The higher Charged Profusion is really just better because it also includes the additional one. There's no real loss from it. It doesn't cost anything more. It's the same 120% cost multiplier. Overall, just, you know, whatever. I think that Sniper's Mark is an interesting one, but it's also one that's going to be difficult to actually be able to activate, right? If you can't crit, right? If you don't have critical hit chance, then it doesn't work. So we have to do a quick tutorial here on how do you get critical hit chance and what would be an acceptable level of critical hit chance so that you can actually utilize the Sniper's Mark. Well, if we take a look at our weapon, this is the first place that you take a look for when it comes to critical hit. So on the weapon itself is a base critical hit chance. This base critical hit chance is probably the most important thing when it comes to critically hitting, unless you happen to be like an Oracle with 100% critical hit chance no matter what, which in that case, you'll always trigger it, so not really a big deal. Now, different bases, of course, have different critical hit chances. I believe the highest critical hit chance base for spears, for an example, is the Akoyan Spear. The Akoyan Spear has a 7% base. And of course, you can increase that higher. So if you get a critical hit chance on the weapon, this critical hit chance that is on the weapon actually adds to the base, which is going to give you a much higher critical hit percentage in general. Now, not a lot of things in the game give base critical hit percentage. So that is exactly what you're interested in the most if you're trying to do a critical hit build, is you want high critical hit percentage base, because everything else that you do is going to be modified off of that critical hit percentage. For instance, my character right now, if I go down to my critical hits, you see I have a base of 5%, and that's literally my base. It's 5%, because I have not stacked any percentage critical hit chance at all, right? However, if I were to stack critical hit chance bonuses, I could increase that, but starting with a 5% base is pretty trash. If we pull up our calculator real quick, I can give you an idea of how you could think about this. So, if I had, say, 200% increased critical hit chance, and I have a 5% base, that's 5 plus 200%, which is only going to bring me up to 15%. However, if I was using that Akoyan spear from earlier that has a base critical hit chance of 8.92, then we could do that calculation again at 8.92 plus 200%, which is going to bring me more to 26%. As you can see, even just a small percentage increase on the base calculates out to a large percentage increase in total once you start calculating in all your critical hit nodes and all your bonuses, right? So critical hit damage is not really very important, as it is getting your critical hit percentage high enough so that you can actually constantly crit the target. So how much is the right percentage of critical hit for most characters? Well, I mean, honestly, you kind of want it as high as you can get it. Unless you're an Oracle, and if you're an Oracle, I think like 35 to 40% is actually more than enough. But for a lot of characters, you're going to need a lot more than 35 to 40% if you want to crit all the time and you want to build into a crit build. Now, critical damage bonus, if you search for it, is like all over the board. There is critical damage bonus, there is critical percents, there is tons of bonuses all over the board that you can potentially build. Now, things like this, which is 5% increased critical hit chance, is not going to be a flat critical hit chance to your character. It's going to be a bonus percent, right? So the difference is flat crit and bonus crit are just kind of big differences. Take, for instance, the Thorns critical over here, which is 6% to Thorns critical hit chance. This one is actually base. And it's kind of hard to know which ones are base and which ones are not, but most of the time they're not. But this one in particular is actually base critical hit chance. And there's another base critical hit chance one for Thorns. Can't remember where it is right off the top of my head. It hardly matters, but we're not really talking about Thorns, are we? But the crit nodes actually are all over the whole board, though. If you take a look, a lot of them are focused up into the monk side of the tree. So if you're trying to build a critical hit build, a lot of the crit nodes are up here. But there are also a decent number, like spread out throughout the entire tree, depending on what you're trying to do and what kind of character you're building. Even if you're running the Oracle, and even if you have the magic node that makes it so that you always crit, here's the problem with that node. So the problem with that node is you basically get 0 critical damage bonus, okay? So the way that it works is it will always crit, but every time it doesn't, it reduces, or rather specifically less, which is a multiplier, not a reduction, which is an additive or negative bonus, right? So it lesses the critical damage bonus. This means that if your critical hit chance is very low with the Oracle bonus, it will continually reduce that critical damage bonus. Like, say if you had like 500%, it'll continually reduce it until eventually it hits 0%. And what this means is that your critical hits will be doing 0% extra damage. So they're basically doing nothing. They function as a critical hit, and they will work for the mark, but they will not actually do any additional damage, right? And so in that particular case, you don't have to build critical hit chance, and you don't have to build critical damage. In fact, you probably wouldn't want to hit critical damage if you're building no critical percentage. But the Oracle would allow you to crit 100% of the time, essentially no matter what. There's also a martial arts with the new martial arts tree on the monk, where basically like every hit against one of the ghost bells, I think, counts as a crit, which you can also do. Can't remember if you can mark the bells, but could be interesting. But overall, you're going to be looking for crit nodes. In fact, I could put in critical hit chance, and we can look for critical hit chance specifically. So as you can see, we've got 40% increased critical hit chance if you haven't dealt a critical hit recently. That one's actually pretty strong, and it comes with two 10% critical hit chance nodes, because that one just gives you a huge bonus to your critical hit chance if you fail to crit, so making it more likely that you'll actually crit. Some of them give you like increased critical hit chance against bleeding enemies, which is really easy to do. There's a lot of ways that you can potentially bleed monsters, and it even comes with like two 10% chances to inflict bleeding on a monster with a critical hit. You can also grab like the 30% increased critical hit chance for attacks. There's also spell versions obviously up here. Like overall, like if you're going to be utilizing this particular ability, you kind of have to have critical hit chance, or do you? There are alternative application methods for marks, and we'll talk about those here. So when it comes to marks, you can apply them in various ways. One way that you can apply the mark is to cast it directly on the target. Okay. Another way that you can apply the mark is to apply it using an ability that applies the mark instead. Hand of Chinchilla, for instance, if you socket the mark in, will allow you to apply the mark to the target without actually casting the mark, allowing you to get like a damage hit off or something in return, right? So you get to do something else besides just mark the target. Also, Pounce is another way that you can potentially do it, which Pounce, if you socket the mark in, will automatically mark the target when you pounce on them. And Pounce is actually it's a really fun ability. Really, really good. It not only does it work for marking targets, it's also really good travel ability. It's a slam. It's kind of like everything all in one. It's a beautiful ability. Highly recommend checking it out. Now, there is a way that you can potentially fulfill the conditions of the mark, critical hits, without actually critically hitting, and that is cross slash. So cross slash is one of the werewolf skills, and shapeshift into a werewolf leap backwards as you gouge the ground. Enemies can be hit separately by both gouges. Hitting a marked enemy with both gouges will activate the mark and cause an additional shockwave. This skill essentially works to activate the mark even if you don't actually crit the target. So, for instance, if you were trying to do a frenzy build and you didn't necessarily want to do a crit build, you could potentially utilize cross slash, like, for instance, even in an offhand, you could just have cross slash set up, mark the target, and cross slash. And if you set it up with some of the support gems that we were talking about earlier, like the ability to gain additional charge, the ability for the mark to stay on the target after you activate it, this could allow you potentially to activate it 2 times in a row, getting potentially, what is that, 2, 4, maybe even 5, 6, like 6 charges essentially within a very short period of time. If you cast the ability twice and cross slash twice, or you cast the ability once and cross slash twice, because of course utilizing the eternal mark, you can of course have a chance to keep the mark on the target, right? So we don't have to lose the mark. We can use the eternal mark to make it so that they will not be consumed the first time they activate. So in other words, we'd cast it on the target, cross slash, cross slash. You would get charge Profusion, would give you a chance to get an additional charge each time, so you would guarantee get 2, and possibly get up to 4, with a 15% chance to get a random additional charge, which could potentially be a total of 5, 6. So you can get 5, 6 charges, essentially, total. Now, they won't all be frenzy charges. 4 of them will guaranteed be frenzy charges, and 2 of them will be whatever other charges that you can potentially get. But it's definitely a very interesting way that you can potentially build them, even besides just simply using the sniper's mark in the legitimate fashion, which is casting it directly, right? Overall, I think the marks are definitely a very good addition to the builds if you can remember to cast them. If you can automate them in some way, that's pretty cool too. I think Pounce is a really good way to automate them, but not every build is obviously going to want to use a primal totem or primal, like skills. Some builds are not using primal skills, so you can't work those in. So you're going to have to cast them yourself, essentially. But if you utilize the marks properly, I think they will elevate your game quite a bit. You can get additional critical strike damage if you're building a crit build. You can get more frenzy charges, which you can utilize in a bunch of different ways. How can you potentially utilize frenzy charges? Let's take a look at that. So if we take a look at frenzy charges, you'll see there's a bunch of abilities that consume frenzy charges. Spiral Volley, Wind Serpent's Fury, Whirlwind Lance, Rain of Arrows also consumes a frenzy charge to get more arrows. Glacial Lance causes more freezing explosions. You can also utilize it on Storm Lance to create shocked ground. I can't remember. I think you can bypass this cooldown on ice tip arrows. Barrage makes you fire extra arrows of whatever it is that you're doing. There's a bunch of barrageable skills, and so forth and so on. Explosive spear is actually really cool the way that it works. You throw it and it's like a huge explosion star from basically the frenzy charge, which is really nice. Overall, there's a lot of fun ways that you can use frenzy charges. You can also potentially use frenzy charges for other things. So there is a passive on the board. This passive right here, it's called Resonance. Resonance makes it so that when you gain a power charge, you can get a frenzy charge instead. Or when you gain a frenzy charge, you get an endurance charge instead. Or when you gain an endurance charge, you get a power charge instead. So this essentially allows you to turn your frenzy charges into endurance charges, if that's what you'd like to do. You can also, because of the fact that Charge Profusion also gives you a 15% chance to get another additional random charge, you can also get other charges as well, either power charges or endurance charges. And if you were using this, those would get converted into other types of charges as well. Overall, just really nice. It's just a really fun ability that you can potentially utilize. Another interesting thing that you could potentially do, which is kind of cool, and let's talk about this for just a second. So if you take a look at the Sniper's Mark, I talked earlier about the ability called Marked for Death, which allows you to break armor with a supported skill equal to 15% of the damage dealt. I do believe you can tie that together with Armor Demolisher, so you can get even more armor break, or you could potentially tie that together with one of the lineage supports, which I believe is called Uruk's Smelting. So fully breaking armor with the supported skills causes affected targets to take 5% increased physical damage up to 20%. So you could potentially utilize it not only for armor breaking, but also to get a permanent physical damage bonus as well, which is really cool. I'm pretty sure you can put Uruk's on there. I already have Uruk's on one of my other abilities, I'm pretty sure. I do. So as you can see, you can throw Uruk's Smelting in here as well with the Marked for Death, and you could potentially get even more armor break out of it and also gain a permanent physical bonus. So it's a very utility type ability. Utility type ability. I didn't mean to rhyme that, but it did. And it's actually really nice. The only real major drawback on this skill is the requirement. It's 137 dexterity, and your character might not have 137 dexterity. Depending on your build, well, you know, sometimes it's difficult to get those stat requirements. But let me let you in on a secret. I don't have 137 dexterity. As you can see, I only have 128 dexterity, so I don't actually have enough to utilize this ability. So how am I using the ability when, well, I can't actually fulfill the requirements? Well, there is a passive, and there's some other items and things in the game that can do this too, but its attribute requirements of the gems can be satisfied by your highest attribute. So even if you definitely don't have the stat required to utilize this particular support gem, you might be able to still finagle it with something like the Gemling Legionnaire's, you know, attribute stacking thing, which allows him to use basically any gem he wants, as long as he has enough of a single stat, essentially, to make it work. And that's pretty much it. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you enjoy the content. And as always, keep watching.